Heal your soul and heal the world.
We'd like to dig a little bit deeper into the real meaning of healing
from the standpoint of the school of the Golden Rosicrucians.
that may be different
From the obvious superficial meaning of healing.
And also, we would like to go a little bit deeper into the concepts of soul and how we can use the soul to be a catalyzer of change
To the entire world. One of the pillars of the teachings of the school, and we also believe that this is spread out the entire universal wisdom, the teachings of all nations, peoples, and all times, is that there is an equivalence between soul and consciousness. So soul is not necessarily something abstract. Soul is really another name for the driving force of our lives, that is our own consciousness. And in the moment that we understand that, we can also I'm sorry about that. Today, none of the electronics are helping us. So we can also say that state of consciousness or different aspects of the soul or the manifestation of the soul end up defining our state of life. Another way to say that, consciousness defines reality. So with those two principles, that the soul is the equivalent to consciousness, and that the state of consciousness actually defines our life, we can also understand that the individual reality of the consciousness can become a determining factor of our collective reality as humanity. And that interaction at the collective level is what's defining the situation in the entire world. A quote, very known quote from Hermes, as above, so below, the law of equivalence indicates that if we want to change these aspects, we need first of all to understand their correspondence. And in the second place, as an alchemist, we need to understand how to begin, which one of the ingredients should come first, and how we should work, and in which sequence we should work to prepare this alchemical formula of transformation. What the school says is that we have to begin with the individual, so that the collective can be influenced by individuals that are totally aware of themselves with a new state of consciousness. And so that this new collective can actually change the world. But another way to put that is, if the individual consciousness does not go beyond the current frontiers of the current state of consciousness that dominates the vast majority of humanity, the entire collective will be nothing more than a mirror of the sum or the multiplication or the exponential curve of the individual state of consciousness. And then if we think, or if we place ourselves in front of this collective mirror, and we think what truly drives the majority of the human beings today, then we can understand what's taking place in the world. The other important aspect that we can extract from this reality or these principles is that we may try to change the world by force. imposing different ideas. Sometimes in a violent way, sometimes without violence, but with other levers that the common state of consciousness can have access to. But even with those initiatives, if we don't change the collective state of consciousness of humanity, and above all, if an attempt to transform the entire body, the entire cosmos, has no correspondence to the quote-unquote cellular level of each individual, this apparent change may last for some time, but it will fade away. And the real state of consciousness of the individual will prevail in the collective, and the world will be, again, a mirror of our real state of consciousness. We've been talking about our state of consciousness, for the majority of the human beings, how it works for most of humanity. We have chosen, a very strong symbol. You know it. It's a symbol that represents lots of different things in different traditions. The meaning that we are taking here is mostly from the Pythagorean school that speaks about the pentagram as a symbol of the human soul. The pentagram is also a symbol of perfection. The proportions of the pentagram are a clear representation of the golden law of progression. That is the law of growth that rules the entire universe. But we can also say that a fiery pentagram represents the symbol of the power of our consciousness, that is almost like a flaming fire that pushes forward in our lives. It is the driving force behind every single person. So the soul is consciousness, and consciousness is what drives us forward. So that's why we have chosen this symbol to represent the soul, the consciousness. Talking a little bit about the current state of consciousness for the majority of humanity. We talk about the natural soul because this is the natural state of awareness of the vast majority of humanity. And what is this state of consciousness? What is this natural soul? Dear friends, without any judgment or any moral assessment about this word, but mostly almost like a technical description. What we'd like to say is that our consciousness is actually egocentric. Why? Because for I don't know how many billions on this planet, they still live as if their ego is the center not only of their lives, but the entire universe. When we go back in history, before Galileo, before Copernicus, we smile about our fellow friends that believed that the earth was the center of the universe. It was a geocentric approach to life. What the universal wisdom says is, well, actually what we see outside is a reflection, it's a mirror of ourselves. State of consciousness is a state of life. So, since the earth was in the center of the entire universe, and humanity was geocentric, that was just the mirror of the egocentric state of consciousness that places itself in the center. And since the ego is standing on earth, and the ego is the center of everything, then the earth is also the center. And everything revolves around it. Yes, we have discovered that the earth is not the center of everything. In the beginning it was the sun, and then now we know a lot about the universe, about the billions of galaxies with billions of stars, each one of them. But if we are honest about ourselves, the state of consciousness of the human being, despite of all that knowledge, did not necessarily change that much. And we continue to place our egos in the very center of our existence and the existence of everybody around us. So, the egocentric consciousness, the natural soul, is a state of all the forces that form our consciousness. And what we would like to do is to take one step further and go a little bit deeper into these concepts. This fiery pentagram will explore the 5 different aspects of the consciousness a little bit later. But this fiery pentagram has a very important characteristic. It has a void in the middle. And that's how the universal teachings or the universal wisdom describe the ego. To us, this may sound like a paradox, because we say the word I countless times during one single day. So to us, it may seem that the I or the ego is something very firm. We'll continue to be surprised throughout the entire afternoon. But when we say I, when we think about our ego, it's almost as if we could touch it. Because we are using this concept, this reality, this center all the time. But if we do a very simple exercise, one with another, and we start to try to raise the layers that define this I or this ego a little bit further, we begin to discover very important things. Ask somebody or ask yourself, who are you or who am I? The answer may begin, well, my name is, well, that's your name. This is not you. I was born, no, you were born there, but this is not you. Well, I do this for work. No, that's your profession. Well, I believe in this or that. Those are your beliefs. So the more we try to define this ego or this I, welcome. The more we try to define the nucleus or the core of this consciousness, the more we will discover that instead of looking like a real solid center, it seems that it is really a void. A void that tries to use images, concepts, ideas to protect itself, to surround itself with, to attach itself to it, so that in the absence of a real identity, the consciousness uses those layers, those veils, to attach itself to it and to define it. So this void of the egocentric consciousness, the center of the vast majority of the consciousness of our fellow human beings, is also the center of a vicious circle of all the elements that are part of the consciousness, but that, turn around this void, turns around this void in a very automatic and repetitive way. So what are those elements? The school, when it uses this image of the pentagram, defines 5 key elements that constitute our consciousness. And this is also a nice way to bring the concept of consciousness from an abstract level to almost a real organic level. So the school talks about the flame of consciousness, that is the fire of our identity, that is also the most subtle and volatile aspect of consciousness. Then, interacting directly with this first element, you have the second element, that is the serpent fire system. If you think, if you place the image of the staff of Hermes or Mercury in your mind's eye, that is what we allude to when we talk about the serpent fire system, okay? The spinal system with the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system around it, okay? Then, emanating from the serpent fire system as small branches of, the main part of a tree, you have the nervous fluid. That is the sum of all the impulses, the electrical impulses, that translate the central fire of our consciousness and moves us forward. Then going to an even more concrete level, and thinking about all the endocrine system, all the main 7 glands, for example, around the 7 chakras of our body, you have a biochemical response. A biochemical response that mirrors this state of consciousness. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, with this representation of the 5-fold natural consciousness or natural soul, with the void of the egocentric consciousness in the middle, we begin with the flame of consciousness. We evolve to the serpent fire system, to the nervous fluid, to the hormonal fluid, and then the last one, that is almost like the sum of everything, let's say the essence of the state of consciousness, is reflected in the blood. That is the most material aspect of consciousness that truly translates alchemically, not only chemically, but alchemically, the state of consciousness of each one of us. And we mentioned to you before, in the previous image, that not only we should pay attention to this void that is almost like a pseudo center of our consciousness, but also to this circle, or to the interaction, to the interconnection of these 5 different elements of the natural soul. And why did we talk about a repetition? Because these elements, they influence each other. So the main thought images that are reflected or that emanate from the flame or the fire of the consciousness, they are transmitted to the entire serpent fire system. Then they branch out in our entire being through every electrical impulse that runs in our nervous fluid, through all the nervous system. These impulses, they influence the functioning of all of our glands. And with this biochemical response from all of our glands, the result is captured by the blood and circulates all over again in the entire body. And dear friends, then the circle is closed. And the blood influences again the flame of the consciousness. And that's why we talked about a vicious circle. Because our thoughts gradually become our reality. You remember that at the very beginning we said that soul equals consciousness, soul equals consciousness, and that state of consciousness becomes state of life. But the reverse is also true. State of life is state of consciousness. So that's how the circle is closed. And another aspect in this simple diagram that we can visualize with the simple diagram is that the space for change is actually very limited. Not only we live in the illusion of identity, but we also live in another illusion, a very big one, that we have a free will. Actually, our will is deeply controlled by all the subconscious and unconscious aspects of our being that are extremely strong, that we are rarely aware of, and that circulate in an extremely fast speed in the entire system. So many things that we believe, that we have chosen, that we thought about, that those are our ideas, etc. Not only they are influences from the outside, today we have plenty of that, isn't it? But not only from that kind of outside, but also from the deeper unconscious levels of our own being. And that is what drives us in this circle. This repetition can take forever. One life, countless lives. Until the moment where the consciousness is so saturated with this turning of these elements that it will reach a crisis. Crisis of identity, crisis of meaning, or eventually a crisis of the lack of those other two elements, of lack of a real identity, or lack of a real meaning. In this moment, something new may happen. Something that will change dramatically, or may change dramatically, depending on our choice, the entire functioning of our consciousness. That is the awakening of that very first thing that we shared with you. The awakening of the spiritual, universal principle that lies hidden in the very core, in the depths of our hearts. And it's present in every human being. That is represented here by a rose, a white rose. We talked about the law of golden proportion that is embedded in the pentagram. But if you look at a rose from above, you are also going to see the same pattern of universal growth. That's why the Rosicrucians call themselves like that. Because the objective of a true Rosicrucian is to put the rose of the heart, in the center of our lives. Not only we are a pentagram, but just like in the Vitruvian Man of Da Vinci, we are also a cross, right? So in that crossroads of our lives, we have to place this principle. And this has been called, as we said before, by many names in different traditions. The Atman, the mustard seed, the lotus flower, we call it the rose or the spirit spark. So this principle is not new to the human soul. It was just dormant. The human soul has to go through that merry-go-round, that repetition, countless times, millions of times, billions of times, until the point that it reached its own limit. And when that limit arrived as a big wall in front of the egocentric consciousness, when the egocentric consciousness cannot provide answers anymore, and nothing related to matter or to relationships or to power or any level of the normal external life can satisfy the egocentric consciousness, then there is enough space here for this principle to manifest itself and start to touch, to instigate, to truly awaken the entire consciousness. It's very important to say, dear friends, that there is literally nothing that the common state of consciousness can do to awaken this principle. We are not here on this Sunday afternoon in such a special place like New York, where you could have millions of other choices. If this principle was not awakened in your heart already. Because in the moment that this principle awakens in our hearts, we become a seeker of the truth, a seeker of meaning, a seeker of a real purpose in our lives. So it is not us who have awakened this principle. It is this principle that have awakened each one of us and truly transformed us into seekers of real answers or a real meaning in our lives. So when that happens, then a new beginning can take place. And that's what the entire objective or the entire purpose of the work of the spiritual schools of all time point to. Real spiritual school is a school that uses this principle as the only basis, as the only master, as the only true driving force that can transform the entire human consciousness. And we'd like to explore a little bit with you how this transformation can take place. Okay? You also recognize the 5 elements of the consciousness, but with a different perspective. You also recognize a circle of interconnecting those elements, but the direction is different. That's why we say that this is almost like a self-revolution process, where we invert the sense of our path in life. How does that work? The spirit spark, the rosebud in our hearts, when it becomes active, it enters in resonance with one of the main centers of our soul, of our consciousness, that we call, because of that importance, a sanctuary. It is the heart sanctuary. When that principle enters in resonance with the human heart, with the human sanctuary, then the sternum, that is this bone here, that in Latin represents or signifies like a point of radiation, it starts to resonate in harmony with this impulse. It's not a constant impulse. It's much more similar to a lightning bolt in a storm. You have the light and you have the thunder. The light is the activity of the spirit. That is something that is totally beyond and above the control of the normal egocentric consciousness. And the thunder is the organic impact that it generates as a resonance, almost as a sound. We've heard about the voice of the silence. That's one way to think of it. So when this resonance takes place in the heart sanctuary, the gland that belongs to the heart sanctuary, that is the thymus, that in normal knowledge is associated with growth or with the immune system, also generates a biochemical response, but not based upon the mere repetition of the other elements of the normal state of consciousness, the egocentric consciousness, but as a reflection of this impulse from the spirit directly into the heart sanctuary. This impulse is also transmitted to the other elements of the consciousness, not only through the blood, but also by the impulse or the impact of this organic response through the nervous system as a new impulse. We talked about the electricity of our nerves, right? So an electrical response in esoteric terms is an astral, so a new astral, not only a new material slash etheric, but also astral fire starts to circulate in our entire being, and a new spiritual fire, a new impulse of consciousness circulates through the entire serpent fire system. So you see that we are going through the same elements of the consciousness, but through a path that is totally different from the normal scheme of things that are generated by the common state of consciousness, the egocentric consciousness. It's going on a reverse path, starting from the most dense to the most subtle. And when those four elements, the four elements of our personality are touched by the power of the spirit, then the sum of all those impulses, they get concentrated in the flame of the consciousness that we spoke before. And this is what generates an insight. The school describes this insight as an ancient memory, as if in this moment we could become aware of an original existence, an original reality, something that is already here manifesting itself, but it is not visible, cannot be perceived by the normal state of awareness of the egocentric consciousness. So that insight is the quote-unquote aha moment, where even for a split second, we look at reality, but from a totally different standpoint. It is as if we took a step back and we realized everything that is taking place, and we see ourselves, and at the same time, we are part of the action, but we see the entire action from outside. And we realize, well, egocentric existence is really void of meaning. Certainly, all those that are looking for answers have had already countless insights. Because the activity of the spirit spark, once it becomes active, once it starts to emanate its fire, it will never stop. And it will continuously stimulate the human being and the human consciousness to find answers. So friends, the spiritual school tells everyone that is looking for answers and that wants to begin a path of self-initiation, a path of transformation, that we need to be aware of this. As we just said, there is not going to be any sort of training that we can use in the realm of thoughts, emotions, desires, manipulation of forces, projection of consciousness, splitting the personality into the subtle domain. Anything, of course, all those initiatives are going to give us some self-awareness and some understanding, but they are not going to fundamentally change our reality as an egocentric consciousness. Eventually, they'll end up just reinforcing some of its aspects. So what the school says is, don't try to awaken the spirit. That's impossible. The spirit is already awakened in you. It has awakened you. So what is your effort on the path? Your effort is to learn how to cooperate with that force that already exists in you. That's why one of the main texts of the school that is driven or offered to those that are beginning the path says, pay attention. Hear more closely. Try to see this force working in you. And the impulse of this force in us is not something that comes and makes us more peaceful or give us, insight or illumination. Dear friends, it's just the opposite. It's a force that instigates, that comes to shake down the entire being. One image, and we see the gospel not as an external narrative, but just like the other books of the universal traditions, like the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, etc. Right? But that image that we find in the gospel, when not a person, but this force comes and says, I did not come to bring you peace with a sword. What sword? The sword of the Spirit that is able to give us what? Self-knowledge. Self-knowledge that comes from us paying attention to that impulse when it manifests itself. Because it's going to show us who we truly are and not who we would like to be. So we need to be humble. And we also need to be aware that the real master is not our ego, but the spiritual force in us. And just like Arjuna and Krishna, we need to learn that Arjuna has to work in conjunction with Krishna and not try to drive the chariot by himself alone. So paying attention to this impulse through countless insights, we may start finally to gain some sort of freedom inside. Of a freedom that is going to gradually, step by step, start showing us who we truly are. Making us free from our illusions, from our beliefs, from the false images that we carry about ourselves and the world. That is the meaning of the know yourself that is carved in the stones of Delphi. So, this constant renewal cycle, starting with the impulse of the spirit spark in the heart and generating stronger and stronger insight, the human being will be able to gradually start changing the orientation of the 5 main forces of his soul or his consciousness. And that's why in the school we talk of a new state of consciousness. A new state of consciousness that represents a new thought, a new will, a new feeling, a new attitude, and finally a new action. You realize that we also began, let's say, with the most subtle aspect. And gradually we moved through the 5 elements of the consciousness until the very concrete aspect of our lives. That's how a new soul, a new beginning can take place and renew the entire faculties of our entire existence. That's the birth of a new pentagram, of a new soul. And when that happens, in the school we talk about the reborn soul. In many, many traditions, we see that the human being goes through the initiation process has to face death and overcome death. Those traditions are present in the stories and the myths, the cosmogonies that we find not only in Europe, but in the Middle East, in the Far East, but also in the peoples of Africa, Oceania, and all the Americas. It's always the same process, dear friends. Because we as human beings, we are the same. We carry the same archetype. And when this new archetype, based upon the rose of the heart, based upon the immortal principle in our hearts, can transform the entire pentagram of the soul, we talk of a reborn soul. Or, using that equivalence that we had at the very beginning, when we had soul equals consciousness, then we can talk of a new state of consciousness, a new way to function, where the entire consciousness can produce a different life, a different reality. That's why we can also say, you remember, we mentioned at the very beginning, state of consciousness is state of life. And that explains the current state of things, not only individually, collectively, but in the entire world. The consequence of almost 8 billion egocentric beings generating this collective chaos that we have, that is practically destroying the entire world. So to revert that, we have to be the change that we want to see in the world, as Gandhi said. And the new state of consciousness that awaits as a shining possibility for each one that has been touched by the spirit spark is that the new state of consciousness can actually manifest a new state of life. That is the message that the spiritual schools of all times have been sharing with the seekers, with all human beings. That's the message that the school brings in this moment as well. And that is the objective of the spiritual school of the Golden Rosy Cross. And then we conclude where we began. If we want to heal the world, and we all do, we have to start by healing our own soul. And to heal our own soul, we have to overcome our current egocentric state of consciousness. If we are able to do that, then we can become a change agent in the world. Not externally, not forcing a different way of acting into other human beings, not even with our words, but through who we are. Because what we are speaks louder than words. And allow us to say this, friends. Real, aware human beings is what we need in this world. Human beings that can be the change, not that talk about change. They are the change. They are the change in everything they do and in everything they are. And just like when you take a big amount of dough and you have, some yeast, a small portion of yeast in this vast world, you can transform the entire collective reality. This is a possibility right now. And it depends on each one of us who have been awakened by the Spirit to this new possibility. So, to heal the world, we hope that each one who is capable of can also heal his or her own soul.